The temporal fossa is a shallow depression on the lateral side of the skull. Its constituents include the frontal, the parietal, the temporal, and the sphenoid bones. The boundaries include the superior and inferior temporal lines and the zygomatic arch. The infratemporal fossa is a small, irregularly shaped cavity of the skull. It is located below the temporal fossa and medial to the mandible. Its boundaries include the posterior surface of the maxilla, the lateral pterygoid plate of the sphenoid, the external acoustic meatus, and the undersurface of the greater wing of the sphenoid. The muscles of mastication include the masseter, the temporalis, and the lateral and medial pterygoid muscles. The masseter originates on the zygomatic arch and inserts onto the angle of the mandible. The temporalis muscle originates on the entire temporal fossa and inserts directly onto the coronoid process. Deep to the temporalis, the medial pterygoid muscle has two heads. One originates at the maxillary tuberosity, and the other on the medial surface of the lateral pterygoid plate. Both heads insert onto the medial surface of the mandible. The lateral pterygoid muscle also has two heads. One originates on the lateral surface of the lateral pterygoid plate, and the other on the infratemporal crest of the greater wing of the sphenoid. Both heads insert on or near the capsule of the temporomandibular joint. The maxillary artery of the infratemporal fossa. The carotid artery bifurcates into the external and internal carotid arteries. The internal carotid artery enters the skull through the carotid canal. The external carotid artery branches into the superficial temporal artery and the maxillary artery. The maxillary artery arises within the parotid gland and is visible superficial to the lateral pterygoid muscle. In some cases, the maxillary artery can be found deep to the lateral pterygoid muscle. The maxillary artery is categorized into three parts and passes medially through the infratemporal fossa: the mandibular, the pterygoid, and the pterygopalatine. The mandibular division is the first part of the maxillary artery. It includes the deep auricular, anterior tympanic, middle meningeal, accessory meningeal, inferior alveolar, and the mylohyoid. The pterygoid branch includes the masseteric, the deep temporal, the pterygoid branch, and the buccal. The third and final part, the pterygopalatine, consists of the sphenopalatine, the infraorbital, the posterior alveolar branches, as well as the descending palatine. The nerves of the infratemporal fossa. The largest of three divisions of the trigeminal nerve, the mandibular division, or V3, exits the skull through the foramen ovale. It first gives rise to the meningeal and medial pterygoid branches before it divides into an anterior and posterior division. The meningeal branch travels from V3 and then back into the skull through the foramen spinosum. The anterior division of V3 includes the masseteric, the anterior and posterior deep temporal branches, and the buccal. The larger posterior division consists of the auriculotemporal, the lingual, the inferior alveolar, and the mylohyoid. Arising from the facial nerve, the chorda tympani hitchhikes onto the lingual nerve. Finally, a notable relationship is between the auriculotemporal nerve and the middle meningeal artery as shown.